Okay, and I think we're live. All right. Hi, Duigu. I'm so excited to see everyone who's joining. All right, so just give me 30 more seconds and I'll introduce myself and everyone else for anyone who's new. So typically what we do a Facebook Live for the Work Bigger community almost every Friday. But this time we open this conversation to a lot of people outside of Work Bigger because it's such an important conversation to have, and I really wanted to broaden our audience. So we have Kate, who is our community director, and she's going to be fielding questions, managing all the stuff that's happening in the background. Hi, Kate. Thank you for joining us. And we have Dr. Linda Savage, and I'm going to introduce her in a minute. For those of you who are new, or if you're watching, let us know, where are you watching from? You know, give us a shout out. I'm calling from Hoboken, New Jersey. Dr. Linda's in San Diego. Kate's in Chicago. We'd love to know where you're watching from. And for anyone who's new, I'll introduce myself. My name is Velma McCaffrey. I'm the CEO and founder of Work Bigger. If you're not familiar with Work Bigger, everything that we do is about challenging the status quo and redefining work. So that work is really a vehicle for creativity, change, and living an awesome life. And we do that in 3 ways. 1, community. We have an amazing safe space for women where we have a lot of conversations like this one around female sexuality, confidence, mindset. We also offer content and resources on our blog, www.workbigger.co, and we're going to share this on there after the interview so you can access it at any time. And the third piece is we offer content and, we offer programming and education and coaching. We work with both companies and individuals and really work on helping women through career change and career development. So hold on 1 second. I just want to make sure. Kate, I might need you to turn off your camera so we could do a speaker view. Okay, give me 1 second, everyone. Okay, I think that's good. And let me just check the Facebook Live. Kate and I are going to be checking back and forth to make sure it's working, and it looks like it is. So, okay, now back to our program. Now, for today, I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Linda Savage. I have been reading her book and have been so fortunate to connect with her. Dr. Linda is the mom of one of my really good friends, Jamie, who is also in the Work Bigger community. I went to visit Jamie in San Diego in February and met her mom, and we were talking about the patriarchy and women and the Me Too movement. And I remember saying to Linda, I was like, you know, I feel like I'm so tapped into this women's space, and I'm constantly talking about feminism and what it means for us women and men, but I'm really lacking a strong grasp of the ancient history, and I don't have much context in terms of what does it even look like for a woman who's fully realized. We've been in this patriarchal society for so long that I don't feel like we have that many examples, and I think having that context is really important because, you know, as we often say, you can't be what you can't see. So Dr. Linda handed me her book and she said, well, read this. And as soon as I started reading it, I was just completely obsessed. And I'm going to share it here. Kate's going to share a link for you all to check the book out. Now, Dr. Linda, she's the author of this book. She's also a licensed psychologist and a certified sex educator who's recognized as a leading couples therapist. She's a certified professional sex coach, and she's a dynamic speaker and seminar leader. She is also recognized as a transformational healer by the Light Connection, and she's written for the Huffington Post and other media outlets. She's super passionate about helping couples experience their full potential and bringing wholeness to relationship and sexuality. And it's because of all the work she's done with both women and men that she is such an expert in this space. And she's really tapped into the trauma that women have experienced, how trauma impacts women in a deeper way outside of sex, but also our confidence, how we show up at work, how we show up in life, which is why I'm so excited about this conversation. And then lastly, and Dr. Linda, you can feel free to correct me if I'm missing anything because I want to make sure I cover everything. But for the last 13 years, Dr. Linda has also been training and facilitating shamanic groups integrating relationships and sex therapy with shamanic practices. So with that, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here.
Well, I'm really excited to be here. I really appreciate everything you're saying.
Yay, amazing. So before we jump into the discussion, I would love to start off just by asking you what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, there's a long story, but I'm going to give you a briefer version of it. I've been obviously reading and being interested in archaeological information, particularly written by women of pre-patriarchal cultures. But what really, compelled me is that I was in a place called Findhorn in Scotland. It's very northern Scotland. It's a New Age community, still there. And it was the summer solstice, which is just past for us. Mm-hmm. And I had this dream because it's a twilight time. There's no dark at that time. And so the dream was a lucid dream. And I was part of a ceremony, and I knew that I was going to be meeting this male that was also trained. We were both trained, priest and priestess. And I knew this was going to be a very erotic experience. In the dream, I never consummated it, but I was so alive. This experience just captivated me. And so when I woke up, I was vibrating at a faster rate for a couple of days. And at the time, I had decided to be celibate. In those days, a lot of us were experimenting with being monks, And I knew that sexuality is our life force energy. And from that dream, I began to look into stories of what's called the Hieros Gamos, which is a very ancient ritual. I won't explain the whole thing right now, but it's basically the priest and priestess, or the goddess and their consort, are bringing the energy of abundance and spirit down into earth. And it's a very, very sacred enactment. But of course, as cultures became more had a more negative attitude towards sexuality, that became interpreted as something much more sort of gritty. But it's a very sacred thing. So I actually had a dream about it, and it was so real, there was no question in my mind. And so for me to begin writing a book about sacred sexuality, essentially, but I was starting from the point of view of being a sex therapist and what women were finding missing in their lives now, and then going back and recreating what, as best we know, what sexuality was in cultures that honored the feminine.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm really curious, if you're watching this live, we'd love to hear what questions you have. We can cover questions at the end, but if something comes up for you, feel free to share it, because I know for me, I had a lot of questions around this topic because it's not something that we talk about a lot. So I just want to open that up to the audience. One thing I want to go back to, Linda, is where you said sexuality equals a life force energy. I don't think it's often thought of that way. And
it is the life force energy, along with breath. Energy. Basically, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So in the book, you cover the 3 phases of women, right? You talk about the maiden, the motherhood phase, and the crone. And what stood out to me was the story of Inanna and Eileen, right? And Inanna has, she's a maiden in ancient times, and her approach to sexuality feels very empowering, whereas Eileen is a young woman in modern society, and her experience is very different. Can we talk about what those 2 experiences are like? Maybe you can give everyone a quick recap of the experiences that the 2 women had and how they're different. And then I would love to, just talk more about how sexuality is a life force or the life force.
Yes. Because it really is. It's, we don't separate in our bodies. Breath and sexuality are one. It's not like, oh, breath is this and sexual, you know what I mean? Anyway, the story of Eileen is essentially my story with a few facts changed, but basically, and I grew up in the 50s. I came of age in first menses in the 50s. So what you're seeing is a time when it really was worse than it is now, but not a lot has changed. That's the interesting part. I mean, you're in the millennial group. And I see women all the time, younger women, and everyone has some way in which they felt ashamed or squelched or discouraged or judged for becoming a woman, you know, and that's a simple way to put it. The story of Inanna I created. Inanna is actually the name of an ancient, very revered goddess. She's the goddess that you see depicted. She's holding up the world. And it's based on reconstructing. There's some old books in the 70s, women's studies became a thing, but it also became a very marginalized thing. So I was beginning to read things like When God Was a Woman and Rian Eisler's book, The Chalice and the Blade, and just things that allowed me to tap into my own, I won't say it's a memory, but my sense of how it really was. So, you know, there's definitely creative license in there, but it feels really true. And when Rian read my manuscript, she says, yeah. So Inanna becomes, you know, first Menses was around the same time, somewhere between 12 and 14. And the women then take her and any other women that have come of age and honor them. It's kind of like the Red Tent. Most people have read the Red Tent. Only the problem with that book is they sort of put down the goddess in the book, which is sad. But essentially, women would gather, particularly because women would bleed about the same time with the moons because we didn't have electric light. And so, you know, we were more naturally with the cycles of the moon. In any case, women would gather, and with the new maidens, because maiden doesn't mean virgin, it simply means a woman who's had her first menses, and talk to her about everything all the wisdom that women had, you know. And it wasn't, oh, now you'll have children. It was, part of it was how not to have children if you so chose. Part of it was about the pleasure, you know, because that maiden period is supposed to be discovering pleasure. That's what it is. And so they would tell story, they would share their wisdom, but more than anything, these women felt honored. So that's the beginning. And from there, we all know that many, many ways in which women in modern times have been treated, mistreated, judged, so on. That's probably one of the most broken stages that we have is that introduction into not only first menses, but the pleasure of sexuality.
And that's where the trauma starts, because we're made to feel a lot of shame, you would say, in that period.
You know, it doesn't necessarily only start there, because unfortunately I have been a witness and held space for women telling stories of much younger molest and so on. So the trauma could start very early. And part of it is because women for a very long time were possessions. And any female in any household, and this is up through Victorian era at least, were fair game for lust, essentially. And so there's trauma all the way through. But certainly in our times, even if you had loving parents, there was this sense that you were dangerous now. You could be having a baby, which could bring shame on your family. And in the ancient times, any child was seen as a gift from the goddess. There was never any sense of illegitimacy, none, because these cultures were matrilineal, not matriarchal. They were actually cooperative communities. And this is the research from Maria Gimbutas. So if you ever want to start studying some of this stuff, you know, she did a lot of the original research. But essentially, you now would be somebody they had to guard, they had to limit, you had to be told, don't let anybody touch you. I mean, I hear these stories even today. Now, what we have, unfortunately, in your millennial and the kids that are coming up now is almost a flip. Now, the parents are probably still not happy about it, but we have something called a hookup culture. And I was just at a conference listening to some research about how that has actually done damage to men and women, young men and women, around not even understanding what a relationship would be. Because hookup is literally, we just don't do feelings, we don't talk about relationship, we just do our thing and that's it, which is a tragedy. So, you know, there's trauma in all kinds of ways that occurs. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about feelings. as both, and you talk about hookup culture, and I envision, right, both young men and young women are
Yes.
sort of stifling their feelings that are coming
Mm-hmm.
up.
Yeah,
And
men are damaged by this culture too, you know?
yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit about that as well, because I think it's important. I know there's so much I want to talk about. I get you questions, and I'm like, I don't know if we're going to be able to cover all this. We may need to have
That's all right. I can come back
um,
another time.
so talking a little bit about feelings and seeing how, you know, as women, whether that trauma happens before we become maidens or as we're going through that maiden phase, can you talk a little bit about the impact that has, and from an emotional standpoint and beyond, like with it, like how
Well,
you see that
this is probably a big dissertation, but I'm going to again give you the cliff notes. Trauma around sexuality deposits shame. I mean, we get shamed in other ways, like potty training. Sometimes people have shaming, you know, there's all kinds of ways. And the young men, as little boys, get shamed for having feelings. Anything other than anger is not okay. So there's many ways, but sexual shame seems to be one of the deepest ways that people are wounded. And I see men wounded with sexual shame for different reasons, but for women, it's always, they're essentially a target. You become a target as soon as you become attractive and have a little bit of roundness. And I remember my generation, you know, you get catcalls and you just took it. You know, there was no, are you all right, sister movement, or any of those things where women are saying, hey, if you see a woman being harassed, stand by her, you know, that kind of stuff. And we had date rape, but it was never called that. And it was always the woman's fault, always. Boys will be boys, and it's your job either to make yourself unattractive. For, you know, about 1,000 years, women had to cover their heads and wear brown or something, you know, and it still didn't protect them. You know, the burqas don't protect women in, you know, Islamic countries. So, but it's shaming. It's all about your beauty. Just shut it down.
Yeah, which brings, okay, so I'm like going back and forth between two different questions that I have.
Mm-hmm.
One, you talked, and I'm going to read this on page 58 or 59, I believe. I'm going to read this quick, just a couple of sentences, because you talk about glamour and how it's redefined, yeah, in our culture today. You say, today our culture still resists the seductive pull towards pleasure, but it would be meaningless for society to condemn the power of feminine attraction if there were no cultural prejudices about free female sexual expression. The magic of glamour is the enhancement of feminine magnetic and attractiveness. Yet generating your own magnetic energy extends beyond adorning the external body. It comes from discovering the secret of your inner radiance. Oh, I love that. Ultimately, glamour is the power to radiate inner light. But that's not really how it's talked about, right, in society.
Right. Well, let me give you the history of the word. It actually comes from a Scottish word, grama. I'm not very good at Scottish. And which really almost meant something magical. And really, when women have been in touch with their inner energy, so they're not doing what's external is what I need to pay attention to. They're paying attention to the inner world. There is, and women do it to this day, a way in which you can radiate energy, and you can choose to do it. And some women don't choose it, and they don't realize, you know, that they're doing it. And those are the ones that tend to get accosted and so on. But when you are taught how to use this energy and to relate to this energy in your body, because sexuality is not an act, it's what this energy is in your body. And when you learn to work with it, then you can be more clear. But glamour was a word that eventually became in the English language. And during the time, there's about 500 years where women were hunted down as witches. It's a horrendous history, which even now there's not a lot of real good documentaries about it. I have one of them. And so the ability for women to use their inner radiance became basically a heinous witchery, you know, evil act. And women were being hunted for 500 years. So that dousing that energy and tamping it down, which is really what patriarchal, you know, if you look in the Bible, you need to cover your heads, you need to shave your hair. I mean, all of that. So we're talking about a long history where women would feel dangerous if they were radiating their energy, and bad things could happen. So become a gray mouse, just cover up, but women still found ways to exercise their magical powers. It was very tricky, very dangerous. But this one had to do with being in connection with your energy, this Kundalini sexual energy. And it's not only supposed to be used for like a particular act, it's used for creativity, it's used for healing, all of these things. And, it's sad, but the history of glamour is an interesting one, because when Hollywood began to use the term, it was literally about looking not quite yourself, big gobs of makeup and, fake stuff and, dresses and all that. And so it wasn't no longer about your inner light. It was about the external. And essentially they learned to make women look, very different than they would look if they hadn't been all gussied up,
Yeah. The question that comes up for me next, and I'm wondering for all the ladies who are watching this live, what questions are coming up for you now? But how do we radiate that energy? Like, what are some tools that we can leverage to connect with that?
Some of the simpler things that when I do workshops for women around this, there's ways to use breathing. It's a lot like yoga and some of the Kundalini yogas and so on. You can access it. First of all, you learn to take your attention inner rather than external, which is actually something many women have to learn, because when they hate their bodies or think they don't look good, they're actually picturing somebody looking at them from the outside. And the good feeling is the inner experience. So you can do some pelvic rocking and breathing. I have a meditation that I've created for it, where you begin to feel this energy that's there. Kundalini simply means coiled one. Almost all cultures, indigenous cultures, pictured sexual energy as a snake at a time when snakes weren't evil, right? And so the energy undulates in the body, and you can feel it. And over time, you can use that energy, and you can radiate it, or you can use it for a creative act. You can use it to dance. You can use it for all kinds of ways in which women find their natural self expressing. Yeah.
So I want to go back to what you said about first women have to connect to their inner voice, because that's what I see as
not just a voice, the body too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll let you elaborate on that.
This is a shamanic concept. Words are consciousness. That's the term. And we live in a mind-based culture. So for us, consciousness means everything, spiritual, whatever. But what I've learned in shamanic work is that the body is the first way of knowing. We have body wisdom, and it doesn't have words initially. That's why I stopped you. I thought, when we listen to a voice, that's cool. But the first practice is to learn to go into a state of awareness, where you don't yet have to make a story about it. I mean, eventually, because we want to share, we'll say something. But the first step is to practice awareness. And one of the best ways to practice awareness, besides this kind of rocking pelvis and breathing thing, is to meditate. Mm-hmm. Now, meditation, people think that we have a term, mindfulness, and I'm thinking, yeah, actually what I believe is the benefit of mindfulness is to take us out of the mind, mm-hmm. Into just a moment of presence, and that practice of presence is really, it's simple in the sense of the concept, but it's a practice you have to do on a regular basis to really understand, because we've been taught to listen to our heads. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's in our heads is often external. It's like, okay, I heard I was supposed to believe this, or I heard the lecture, or the doctor told me, and I now have a very deep relationship with my own health. And, because your mind goes, oh, they told me, I had Crohn's disease when I was very young. And I had an incident recently, and I heard this is altitude sickness. And I thought, there's an inner healer. And that inner healer is part of the body awareness, the body wisdom.
Oh, yeah. I love that you're sharing this, because I feel like this is what's missing.
Yeah.
With everything, exactly. We're often looking to the outside for answers, but if we can turn inward, we can find it within ourselves.
Yes. And I think that's a radical concept, by the way. A lot of people don't like that. They want us to listen to what they are saying, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a form of control.
Mm-hmm.
If I have to do what the book says or the rules say or the preacher says, or, you know, then I am not listening to my inner, you know, because it became so radical that they wiped out a whole group of people called the Gnostics in France. I mean, that's history. You can look that up. Because their belief was that their connection to spirit was within. And that was dangerous because now they weren't listening to what the priest told them to do, you know. And it's the same thing now, you know. If I say, I know now, and I do sometimes my doctors, that this toxic medicine you want me to take isn't really going to be good for me, I'm using supplements. That's an example that I do. And they look at me funny every single time. My primary care says, you could blah, 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 you need to take statins. And I say, but I am taking red yeast rice. And they just blank out. So that listening to your inner voice in modern times, sometimes, you know, no, listen to the doctor. You're supposed to hear what they say, not what you have inside.
Yeah. And you cover in your book the healthcare industry too, and just the issues that you see around that. Should we talk about that quickly?
I actually probably have a lot more information about it now than I did then. Basically, who I would trust if I were looking for my healthcare is people who have had a medical background, but also have chosen to work with, which is called alternative. I think that's sad. The truly herbal and natural versions of healing. And Christiane Northrup is an example of that. She's been in the alternative for many, many years, but she also has the medical understanding. So it's not like we're kicking out it. We're just saying, that's useful information. Now, what else could I do that is more in tune with my body? Mm-hmm. And that's it. And this has to do with hormones. It has to do with menopause in particular. She's my go-to person for menopause information. And, you know, and then you still run it by your own inner knowing. Mm-hmm. And for that, the practice of meditation helps you learn how to calm fear. Because the other thing our culture is based on is fear. Mm-hmm. Watch out for this, you better buy this so you won't get whatever, you know. And you watch the news. I don't, but I used to watch, and every once in a while I'll see an ad, and I see the underlying fear. Either you won't get the girl if you don't drink this, or you won't, you know, you'll be robbed if you don't get our, you know. And so and this is something the shaman that I work with has said all along. He said, it's a fear and scarcity culture, you know. And we women know that could be different. And that's interesting because, you know, there's been an effort to intimidate us for a really long time. And the bravery I see in women, I love to find out stories. I get Upworthy, and, you know, they tell sometimes beautiful stories of women who, against a lot of odds, still are using their voices for betterment. And, you know, Malala is an example. But there's been a lot of effort to keep us in our place. You know?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to sound like, you know, I'm a radical, whatever, but when you encourage anyone, men or women, to develop an awareness experience, which is a kind of meditation, and then be able to listen to their own wisdom, basically you're creating freedom. Mm-hmm. You know? Yeah. And freedom's a little scary to folks that want to be in charge and, you know, mold us into what would, you know, we'd be good consumers, you know?
Yeah, which that in itself, that need to control, I think, is also a scarcity mindset, yes. Right? Versus operating
from the need to control comes from the fear. Mm-hmm. And those that develop this illusion that they can control everybody, and I won't mention any names, then act in these ways to intimidate. It's sort of a circle of, you know, fear, got to control, I'm going to be in charge, I'm going to create fear to these people, you know, and it's been going on pretty much since patriarchy took over, mm-hmm. because there was never any ownership of the land until the people from the eastern steppes, the herders, came in. I mean, there's a whole history of when that was, and they replaced the old sort of earth-based understanding of nature with the sort of concept of a sky god that was going to punish and kill and you better do, and then grabbing property and becoming wealthy, and you've got more than somebody else. All of that came in with that invasion of a whole different way of understanding the world.
I want to touch, yeah. I want to touch a little bit on the crone phase that, of the woman. Yeah. What you wrote about the crone phase and how it's such an empowering time in women's lives. I think it's such an important message. And actually I was speaking to my mom and my sister's mother-in-law the other day, and we just got into discussion about how when you get older, like the limitations around that. And I immediately like referenced your book, of course. And yeah. So,
well, what's interesting is I was 54 when I wrote the book, and I was actually in my own way imagining how it would be to truly be in this phase, because 54 is really not quite, anyway. So the dilemma is when I started doing talks around my book, people would say, we don't like that word crone. It's so ugly. Can't you use a different term? And I said, well, it's wise woman. But I also had to educate people because the word means crowned one. Crone is the crowned one.
Powerful. Yeah.
But the medieval and Renaissance propaganda created old crone. Ooh, crony, ugly, and the image of the witch and all that, which is just so tragic. And unfortunately, because there wasn't much published stuff, the most published thing after the Bible was a book around how to get a witch, how to, the Maleficorum. I can't remember. It's in Latin, but it's the most published book during that time besides the Bible. And it was all about, and it's a horrible book, so don't ever get it, but it's there. And so the propaganda was really intense. Let's be afraid of older women. Now, really the fear was of their power, because people would go to the local wise woman who was an herbalist, because herbs were always, women would make potions. And then the roles they played, such as a midwife, which was always and still had been up until the beginning of the 20th century, really, women handled birth, but they also handled death experiences too, but were then being put to death because they were assisting people to go in peace as opposed to suffer. Because again, the biblical theory is we're born to suffer. And that message is, to me, the opposite of what's really true. But anyway, so the crone stage was recognized because women lived longer. They lived longer. And so the gathering of wisdom, we'd raised kids, we'd been part of communities. Women often were the ones that called in the invocations and did the rituals. And this is, prior to patriarchy. So they were the ones that people would turn to for understanding herbs, for learning how to heal, for helping them give birth. So all of those things were the natural roles of women. And they eventually got taken over. In fact, during the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, they literally made it a law that women could not go to medical school. So they basically said, nope, and we'll prosecute you if you heal people. Yeah. So sadly, but women still play those roles at great risk. We all hear stories, and I hear them in other countries, that people would know where this certain woman was who would give you something to help you with whatever the issue was going on.
Yeah. And the way you talked about it in the crone chapter is that it's a really empowered time in women's lives. Like for women, should be. Exactly. So what does that look like? Like we talked about what it looks like from an ancient perspective, or like what could it look like today?
Well, first I want to mention that near that stage in life got obliterated. So unless you were a queen, and even then you got replaced by a younger woman, crones were seen as basically headed towards death. And, as soon as they couldn't reproduce and they didn't have, whatever value that the mother stage had, they were essentially seen as non-citizens, non-entities. And that wiped out this huge role for women. So now it's returning, because you and I all see these amazing stories of women that are in their late 50s, 60s, 70s, who come out into society and found a nonprofit or develop a charity, or, you know, I mean, the things that you're teaching women in your age stage. And so you see these women coming out and doing something, really making a difference, even if they don't have a lot of resources. And then you see people like Oprah, and, you know, I'm not, you know, I like her, but, you know, other people might not. But what she's doing is showing a powerful Black woman in her crone stage, you know? And what is she doing? She became famous because she would talk to people about their feelings. That, I mean, I remember watching her, and that she had a gift for getting people to talk deeply about how they really felt. Mm-hmm. And then she'd expose certain things, you know, that were going on in society, of course. But anyway, so it's a time that every woman is going to have a unique. Now, some women may just choose to have a quiet path, which is great, and impact the people around them, take care of grandkids or other people's kids. I mean, there's beautiful stories of women and how they express it uniquely. So it's not about necessarily being big in the world. It's also about you doing your quiet help in whatever way you do, because it's a time of giving back. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I have 2 more questions, and then I see we have a bunch of questions coming in. Let me just check real quick with our Facebook Live group, and the ladies here. Oh, I'm so excited to see everyone who has joined. Aside from the crone phase, what does a fully realized woman look like?
Yeah, I saw that question. I was thinking, holy smokes. I mean, I think we could create a community definition from everybody's response to that, because fully realized to me is just you're really in touch with yourself. You're aligned with yourself. And how that is you're no longer doing what others say you're supposed to do. I mean, I'm not particularly a cookie baking kind of person, so I do other things. But, you know, there was a time when, what, you don't bake pies and do this? You know, what's wrong with you? So the external voice of what we're supposed to be needs to be muted. Mm-hmm. So that we can be, and that's the practice of meditation, the practice of walking in nature, whatever you do that allows you to feel aligned. And then moving from inspiration. So you don't take an action until you feel it. And again, that's the heart-based as opposed to the head-based. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful thing. And the more you spend time having your own yoga practice or meditation practice or something like that, the more you begin to feel something that turns into an inspired, I want to do that, you know? Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't
That's
agree
the best
more.
I could do, because it's very unique.
It's exactly where I was going, because as I said before, I feel like that's what we see. Like, we're not as connected to our emotions, sitting with our emotions and then working from that aligned place.
Right, because we're frightened of our emotions. Mm-hmm. Women have been put down literally medically for being hysterical, which simply meant they were expressing very emotionally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot of fear around emotion, and men in particular, sadly, are wounded. My favorite writer, by the way, for the men's wounding is a guy named Terry Real, who's written extensively. His most famous book is called I Don't Want to Talk About It. It's about men and depression. Yeah. So he talks about the Guy Code. You can look him up on the internet. He's got stuff all over. And the Guy Code is something that little boys begin to get forced into. I mean, I'm not even going to say initiated, not in a nice way. Like, be a man, you know, we got to be rough, you know, don't cry, you know, you go beat up the other kid. I mean, there's all kinds of messages that they get at a very young age, which to me is a tragedy. And it is to Terry Real as well. He's a male and he's very much a man's man. So to have him say this gives it a lot of legitimacy, but he calls it the Guy Code, and you can search it. But in any case, what did you ask me?
No, I'm actually really glad that you hit on that, because I also wanted to cover how a patriarchal society has been harmful to men as well.
Oh, very. Traumatizing. Men have a difficulty. There's a guy that wrote a book about 10 years ago called Emotional Intelligence. It's now become something they test people when they're trying to get a job. And it's funny to me, because he says in the book, well, women kind of have a more natural relationship. And I'm like, duh. But then he had to codify it and make it into thing, and I don't believe he even said anything about meditating, which is the best way to get in touch with your emotions. But anyway, so guys are very wounded by it, and I see women. It's going to sound really strange, but I see women as the healers of the men that come into their lives. And when men allow it, and often part of that healing is sexual healing. This is one of the things I wrote about in my book. And I don't mean that, you act like the porn models or anything like that. And again, it's sexual energy. It's not doing an act. This is the thing that I hate. Sex has become a commodity and has been for the last at least 5,000 years. It's something you either buy or you trade, so you get supported and they own your reproductive rights, they own your body. And that was true for a really long time. So sexuality being this free energy is something that also can heal men. Now, you can't go, okay, guy, step up, I'm going to heal you. You obviously need to move into a relationship, but I think that's one of the most beautiful things that women do, either naturally or consciously with men, They introduce them to a way of relating that's connected instead of this model that is taken over our culture. It's an adolescent male model. It really is. If you watch the scripts, I used to, but I don't anymore. It's this very performance-oriented genital thing, and it's lost 90% of what's really beautiful. Anyway. So that's for the men, and what I really love to promote is sacred partnership. It's my favorite thing because we want to be like this intertwining masculine feminine energy, whether you're in a relationship with same sex or not. There's a kind of way in which it works a little like a stretched out DNA, and that's going to help all of us in a way that can lead us into being much more communal, sharing, community-oriented, caring, connected, all of the good things that to me could help us a lot.
Yeah. Which brings me to my last question, I guess. I don't want to stop asking questions. This came up in conversation. I posed a question in our community where I said, how does sexuality play a role in your work? And there was a lot of conversation, again, just going back to the shame about women feeling very self-conscious in the workplace in terms of how we dress, right? There's this immediate...
We're prey in the workforce. We're prey.
For sure. Yeah. And there's this, we have to hide as a result. So it brings me to the question of how can we embody this female sexuality, this sexual power that we have, sexual energy, in a patriarchal society? Is that possible?
As we're moving into something I hope that's going to not be purely patriarchal, it's developing a relationship with your own sexuality and knowing that this is for you. This is not something you're supposed to do for somebody else. And our culture has put it into a doing. So, pelvic rocking, breathing, Kundalini yoga, any of the things that allow you to really move into your body and honor it. That's really it. And allow for, if you want to have a self-stimulation, have that experience, that's lovely. Anything that allows you to love and honor this energy in your body.
Find alignment.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's absolutely wonderful to be orgasmic. Orgasmic energy is one best way to connect to spirit. And it isn't somebody giving it to you. Mm-hmm. Is the way I get when I started in the field. It was like men are giving women orgasms. How can we give them? And like, no, it's not your job. It's your job to listen and be responsive, but that's not your job. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to check in with the questions because I know a few came in. Let's see. I'm going to check Facebook Live first. Teresa says, all that you're speaking, I experience every day. I'm happy I tuned in. Jamie says hi. Oh. Yay. Jamie's watching. Let's see. Okay, we had lots of questions come in. Hi, Duigu. I'm so glad you're here. Let's see. Kristen Doley. Tanya. Okay, Tanya wrote super talk. I have a question around female rage and grief. From
Mm.
your experience working with women who have sustained sexual trauma, is there a layer of rage that is sitting in them? Do you think this is reflected in the culture around the feminist movement? And is there something in healing this anger by feeling into the grief in order to process it?
Yeah, the big answer is yes to all of it. We have angry goddess images. Kali is one that a lot of people know of, and she was the one that promoted justice when injustice was being done. And so let's say, you don't necessarily have to have been molested, but a lot of that rage comes from inappropriate behavior. And almost every woman has had some inappropriate either touch or verbal something, with an entitled man. So yeah, the rage and grief can come from the loss of, just being born a woman put us in second class citizenship, So and I believe we carry our DNA, all the experiences we've had in other lives. And, so how do we heal it? There's lots of ways. So I don't want to say there's one way, but certainly meeting in groups with women who have very compassionate hearts and being able to talk about whether it's a trauma in your life or what the rage is about. Brene Brown is one of my favorite people around emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And she's talking about shame. And shame is certainly at the heart of everybody's anger, men's anger too. So when you share shame, when you talk about it with people who are listening with compassion, that's important. It can't survive. I don't mean that the minute you talk about it, boom, it's gone, but the more you have the sharing in a group setting, what happens is that the light begins to heal it,
It loses the power, the negative hold it has on you.
Because it thrives in secrecy, darkness, shame. That's where it thrives. And when you are able to talk about it. So that's one of the reasons I do women's groups on the weekends and I also do couples groups, as you know, but it's a safe, really safe, loving place. And the women we sort of build this community of, this is a time to be, not only experience your own learning, but also to be loving, holding space. You're not fixing anybody, you're holding space and loving that woman so that she can begin to love herself. Yeah.
Two different things, holding space and fixing, right?
Big difference, huge difference. Yeah.
Tanya, that was an amazing question. Thank you for asking that. Kristen also asked, question for the speaker, what do women need to look out for as we gain in years? I'm 32 and I would love to be on the lookout and start empowering myself and others now.
On the lookout for what? So here's the thing. We have a myth about aging. It's a story that women have bought, and it comes from the valuation of very young women as the gold standard of how we're supposed to be. When you spend time with yourself all the way through your life, expressing your own individual uniqueness, that means you have to be aware of the self, and you get more aware, and you do things like get into women's groups. You do things that allow you to keep feeling better and better about who you are as a woman. What happens is you have, again, that inner light. And that inner light gets more powerful as you age. So I'm not sure if she's talking about what to look out for in terms of aging issues, or, certainly taking care of your health, but listening to your own wise healer inside. Those are things that you just keep developing as you go along. And I still see the power in community, the community of women, and not just women. Women have wonderful men behind them. I love to see men's groups. My husband just started a men's group with another fellow. So, that kind of sharing in community is something powerful for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Kristen I'm just thinking about Kristen and her question a little bit more. I think it's a process, right? So starting to align and tune into your inner voice as early as possible. That's what I'm thinking.
Yes.
Kristen had to jump off, and she's also a healer, actually. So I know, her talk has really resonated with you. I'm going to keep going because there's more questions.
Okay.
Teresa said, I'm curious to hear from you about societal pushback against women who are in touch with their emotions and needs, and as a result are far less accommodating of the male ego and control, even if that means breaking up, divorcing, sacrificing the nuclear family dream. Personally, I felt pressure from friends, boyfriends, and even couples therapists to fight for the relationship rather than fight for the relationship with myself. Wow.
Yeah.
How do you manage societal pushback?
I know. When I started writing this book, I had to work out a lot of anger that I felt. I had two older brothers, in the story of Eileen, I think there's only one. But anyway, so that pushback is something that we all experience. My spirit feels like if we meet it with the same kind of push, that kind of thing, we're only perpetuating it. That being said, I see the power of grassroots movements where you actually create the change you want to be. Corny term, but still, there's a beautiful documentary that Jamie actually introduced me to. It's called The Shape of Water. That's before the Hollywood movie.
Okay.
And it's narrated by Susan Sarandon, and it takes 5 stories from all over the world around how women started grassroots movements that made changes. It gives me chills to even think about it.
Yeah.
In a way that they weren't just going out and yelling and screaming and being mad. They were actually doing something. In one country, I believe it's Senegal, they made huge strides to eliminate clitorectomies, female genital mutilation. And they did it by creating different jobs for the women that did these things, so they had a way to make a living. They went into communities and had drama acting out, and why this is not good and all that. And they actually changed a lot. So you can probably look it up. It's called The Shape of Water. And if you look for narrated by Susan Sarandon, it is a way for us to feel hope. And I do believe that rather than tuning into anger, if we can tune into something that's hopeful, and we tune into the connection from our friends and family and brothers and sisters who, I don't mean blood brothers and sisters, but people that care. And instead of, yelling and shouting and being angry, actually take some way of inspired action. And I think what that movie does is it shows us, what can be done. That's my feeling about yes, there's been pushback. Trust me, in the 50s, the pushback was ridiculous, and we didn't have a story about it. It was like just how it was. And so I think we're in a time where there's a lot of hope. That's my feeling.
Thank you. Let's see. I see one more question. Jane says, I've practiced owning my sexuality, harnessing that energy, and I'm almost scared by the power of it. I wonder.
It is powerful.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of women feel that way. She said, I wonder about the implications in the workplace because we're still existing in a patriarchal society. Oh, so very connected to the question I put out there, how this might be perceived. And I know my concern about the appropriateness is me still operating under that programming. Wow.
Well, one of the things that women were taught in Anna's story is about how to work with the energy so that it isn't just out there with no way to work. Sexuality has ways of, in other words, if you just do whatever you feel like in the moment, for all of us, there's consequences, even for men these days. But understanding the power of your life force energy is a huge step. And then allowing yourself to be in touch with the wisdom about how that wants to express. So for example, this is why I'm concerned about the hookup culture. I think women think, this is the way to use my powerful sexuality. But if you look at how disconnected it is from your own emotions and from relationship, you'll get that this is not a way. It needs to be whole. It needs to be a whole thing. So it depends on what you're saying, if we're getting, what was the term? Messages from the culture. Now, staying a virgin and never touching anybody is ridiculous. We know that. But how do you use your energy and how do you work with it, to me, is an important learning. And, we don't have enough time to really get into a lot of it, but that is really the thing. So never assume, you know what, I have to use a little caution here, is something from outside of you. The more you're in touch with your inner self, you might be getting that cautionary for good reason, So,
I love it. No, such good questions. I think this is Danielle. Danielle, maybe you wrote this. More on stubborn pleasure, please. I don't know if that was just a comment, but if
Stubborn pleasure?
Stubborn pleasure.
Okay. I'm not sure what that means.
Danielle, if that's you, feel free to elaborate, or if that was just a comment, that's totally awesome as well.
Oh, you know what I said is women are, this maiden stage is discovering pleasure. And she might have heard it as stubborn.
Oh, okay.
That is what we're supposed to be doing, is discovering pleasure. And that is so, as we know, truncated in a culture where you're going to be called a slut anytime now. But anyway, yeah, I think that had to be it, because I don't think I ever used that word.
Oh, yeah, that's what she said. She said it was a comment earlier about the maiden phase.
Yeah, okay, great.
Oh, Linda, this has been amazing. We didn't even, I mean, there's so much we didn't cover. I'm going to share the book again. Kate is sharing it here in the chat. She's sharing it in the Facebook Live for anyone who's watching. I really recommend it. We didn't even cover motherhood. We didn't cover the choice not to become a mother, and what, how that's really important too in our society. The motherhood section for me was huge, because it has taken, my son is 3 now, and it's taken me quite some time to process that transition. And I feel like this book does a really good job of addressing just how to better prepare for these transitions in life.
They're initiations. All of them are initiations. And the learning, just briefly, the learning from the mother stage is surrendering to life. Not only surrendering to what your body's doing in giving birth, but recognizing you have this being that's going to have a big impact. It's not you making that kid be whatever you're supposed to be. It's life, in the way. So that's we could do a one on motherhood. In fact, there may be somebody else that might be interviewed for that.
No, I would love to. And to be honest, I often don't get into it too much because I'm still processing. Right. Like I said before.
But you're great. You're in the middle of it. That's really very valuable. Yeah. And I had 2 children 11 years apart, so I revisited it again.
Yeah.
But it's one of the more important. And women who choose not to, if it's coming from a choice of, I know myself and I know that I'm meant to whatever their energy is supposed to do, it's a good choice, because you can mother in many ways. But anyway, I think it'd be great to do something, because a lot of your people are probably either considering it or in it.
Yep, exactly. We have a lot of women who are, in that millennial phase, and they're asking.
It's getting over medicalized, just like all the other things,
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that we can talk about too. And I'd love to share my own personal experience with it, because
that'd be great. That'd be great. Yeah.
I might get emotional because.
Hey, why would you apologize for that one?
I'm not. No, I'm totally not. But.
Including the screaming, why did you get me into this?
Yeah.
I never said
that. But just seriously, so grateful for this conversation. And I would love to hear, I know Linda and I would love to hear from everyone who's watching live or catching this after, if you have any follow-up questions.
Yes.
Again, I shared Linda's book with you. Kate is sharing it. Tanya wrote, love, love, love. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you, Tanya. Your question's amazing. Yeah.
And my website too, let people know that they could find me through my website and email me.
Exactly, which is goddesstherapy.com.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. Kate, if you can share, Kate shared it in the chat, and I know it's on Facebook Live. What else? Make sure you subscribe to the website, workbigger.co. We're going to host this conversation on there. I really would love for everyone to share this. It's such an important topic. It's not talked about enough. There's a lot of shame, like we said, around female sexuality, and I think it needs to be mainstream. I think for the next generation, these conversations, we should be way past this. So I'm going to share it in the website. I'm going to email you all. So please, please, please share it with men too. Men are huge and a big part of this conversation, and they should be. And I think that's it. Again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Goddesstherapy.com is Linda's website, and I highly recommend you follow her work, because it's been life-changing for me. So thank you, Linda. Thank you so much.
I so enjoyed. Your questions are wonderful.
Thank you.
I'll be anxious to see the replay.
Yes, I'll make sure to send it to you.
Right.
And then I'll share any follow-up follow-up questions that come
That's
as
great.
well.
That's great. And I love that you're bringing the work to your age groups, because this is good. I'm really happy to be able to have the access to talking to a new generation of women that are coming of age, motherhood age, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're fortunate to have your wisdom. Seriously. It's, yeah. I mean, I can't talk about it enough. You can ask everyone. I'm really excited about this topic. So thank you again for everything.
Well, thank you. Okay.
Have a good day.
You too. I'll jump off now. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you, Linda.